All right, so today we're looking into these pretty serious allegations of sexual assault against two pretty big names in music, Jay-Z and Sean Diddy Combs.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to go past the headlines, right? This is a legal situation, a developing one with a lot of kind of unique elements. So we'll look at the accusations themselves, what Jay-Z and Diddy have said about it, and try to make sense of it all.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, too, that we're talking about two incredibly powerful and influential figures in the music industry. So this case has, could have huge implications for their careers and their legacies. And, of course, we can't forget about the accuser, who was really young at the time of the alleged assault, which makes this even more complex.
Yeah, it's not just a celebrity gossip story. This is really about power and accountability and how the legal system handles these kinds of cases.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics. What's the timeline here? When did these allegations first come out?
So it all started back in October of this year, 2024, when a woman who's being called Jane Doe filed a lawsuit against Diddy alleging sexual assault.
Okay, so that's where it all begins. And then things kind of escalated from there, right?
Yeah.
A couple of months later.
Yeah, in December, the lawsuit was changed to include Jay-Z, real name Sean Carter, as the defendant. And this is where I think things get really interesting.
Yeah, because now we're talking about two music moguls, and their responses to this whole thing have been pretty different, haven't they?
Very different. Jay-Z came out with a strong denial right away, calling the accusations heinous, and even urged the accuser to file a criminal complaint, which is kind of an interesting move.
Yeah, that's a bold move.
Yeah.
Can you explain, for those of us who aren't lawyers or whatever, why that's significant? Like, what's the difference between a civil lawsuit and a criminal complaint?
Sure.
And why would Jay-Z be pushing for a criminal investigation?
So basically, a civil lawsuit is about getting money for damages, right? So in this case, Jane Doe is saying she was harmed by Diddy and Jay-Z, and she wants to be compensated for that. A criminal complaint, on the other hand, that's about an actual crime, and it's about punishing whoever did it.
Okay, so by saying he wants a criminal investigation, Jay-Z is basically saying, I'm so sure that I didn't do this that I'm willing to go to jail, basically.
It's a pretty big gamble.
Yeah. It could be a legal strategy. In a criminal case, it's a lot harder to prove guilt. It has to be beyond a reasonable doubt.
So it's a tougher standard to meet than in this civil case, and it seems like that's what Jay-Z is hoping for. What about Diddy, though? How did his team respond?
His team called it a, quote, shameless publicity stunt, and said that the accuser was just trying to get money from Diddy.
So two very different approaches here. Jay-Z basically saying bring it on, and Diddy's team trying to make it all go away.
Right. And it's worth noting that Diddy's got some other legal stuff going on that might affect how his team is acting here.
Back in September, he was arrested for racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transporting people for prostitution.
Oh, wow. Okay. So a lot going on.
Yeah, his trial for those charges is set for May 2025.
So for those of us who don't know what, racketeering is, can you explain that?
Basically, it means doing illegal things as part of an organized group, like a mob boss running illegal businesses.
Gotcha. So these charges against Diddy suggest a much bigger legal issue for him than just this one lawsuit, right?
Right.
And that's important to keep in mind when we think about how his lawyers might be handling all of this.
Definitely. Now, Jay-Z's lawyer, Alex Spiro, has been really active in this case. He hasn't just denied the accusations, he's actually gone after the accuser's credibility.
Interesting. Okay. What kind of things has he brought up?
Well, one thing is he's pointed out parts of her story that don't really add up. For example, she says she talked to Benji Madden, the guitarist from Good Charlotte, at the after party.
Oh, yeah.
But Spiro says Madden was on tour with his band at that time.
Oh, so that's a pretty big problem. Makes you think if there are other things in her story that maybe aren't true.
Yeah, exactly. Spiro also hinted that she might be doing this for the money.
So he's basically saying don't trust her. She has an agenda.
That's one way to look at it, and it's important to remember we're only hearing one side of this right now. The accuser, though, she's sticking to her story, even though she admits there are some things that don't match up.
Like what?
Well, there's the Benji Madden thing we talked about, and also there are differences between what she says happened and what her father remembers about picking her up that night.
Okay, so we have these two different stories. One from the accuser and one from her father, and they don't really agree. Is that just a bad memory, or is it something more on purpose?
It's hard to say for sure. Memories can be fuzzy, especially after so long, and traumatic events can make memories even more messed up.
Yeah. Trauma can definitely affect memory.
Yeah.
But then again, these problems in her story could mean she's making it up.
True. And that's something Jay-Z's lawyer is definitely looking into. He's saying that the accuser is in it for the money.
Okay, so we have this really detailed account from the accuser, but there are also these things that don't add up. It's hard to know what to think.
Exactly. And this is where the courts come in. They have to look at all the evidence, including what the accuser says, anything that supports her story, and what the defense does to make her look less believable.
Right, so it's not up to us to decide if she's telling the truth or not. We're just trying to understand how complicated this case is and look at it from all sides.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that this case isn't just about Jay-Z and Diddy. It's about a much bigger issue,
Yeah.
how our society handles accusations of sexual assault.
Yeah, you're right. This case could really affect the Me Too movement and how we think about power dynamics in the music industry.
Absolutely. This case is like a small example of a much bigger conversation happening in our society, and we need to keep talking about it.
Okay, so we've gone over the timeline, the people involved, and the different legal strategies at play. What's next in this deep dive? Where do we go from here?
I think it's time to look closer at the details from the accuser's lawsuit. We need to see if they hold up and what they might tell us about this case.
All right, let's do it. Let's get into the specifics of her lawsuit and see what we can find.
Okay, so let's dig into the accuser's lawsuit. She gives a really detailed account of that night, starting with how she even ended up at the after party in the first place.
Right. She says she was 13 at the time,
Uh-huh.
trying to sneak into the MTV VMAs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when a limo driver who worked for Diddy approached her.
Yeah, and according to the lawsuit, the driver even told her that Diddy had a thing for younger girls.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty disturbing detail. If it's true, it makes it seem like he was intentionally going after young girls.
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder about who had the power in that situation and whether this was a pattern of behavior for him. Now, the lawsuit also talks about the alleged assault itself, which she says happened in a bedroom at the party.
And she says both Diddy and another woman, some celebrity, were there during the assault.
Yeah, that adds another layer of complexity, right? Who is this unnamed celebrity? Did they know what was happening? Could they be a witness?
It's like a missing piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And I bet both sides are trying to figure out who this person is and what role they played that night.
Definitely. Those details, like the unnamed celebrity, are really important for both sides. They could either back up the accuser's story or completely contradict it.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if we'll ever know for sure who this person is and what they might know.
Hmm.
But let's get back to the accuser's account. She also describes where the assault allegedly happened, right?
Right. She says it was a white house with a U-shaped driveway. And this is where it gets interesting, because there are reports that Diddy used to have parties at a house just like that back in 2000.
So that detail, if it's true, could really make her story more believable.
Exactly. Remember, Jay-Z's lawyer is trying to find holes in her story, saying things don't add up. But if details like the location check out, it gets harder to just ignore her story.
Okay, so we have some things that could potentially support what she's saying. But didn't you say earlier that there were also some things that didn't quite add up in her story?
Yeah, there are a few inconsistencies that NBC News pointed out, like the Benji Madden thing, how she says she spoke to him at the party, but he was actually on tour with his band then.
Right, and that makes you wonder what else might be wrong or even, to be honest, made up in her story.
It's a good question, and there's another inconsistency about how her dad picked her up that night.
What about that?
She says in the lawsuit that her father got her from a gas station after the alleged assault. But when NBC News talked to her father, he didn't remember picking her up from a gas station.
That's interesting. So we have these two accounts of the same night, one from the accuser and one from her father, and they don't match up perfectly. Is this just a case of a bad memory, or is it something more intentional?
It's tough to say. Memories can be unreliable, especially after such a long time. Trauma can make it even harder to remember things clearly.
That's true. Trauma definitely affects how people remember things. But on the flip side, these inconsistencies could mean that she's not being truthful.
Yeah, that's a possibility that Jay-Z's lawyer is definitely looking into. He's basically saying she's just trying to get money out of this whole situation.
Okay, so we have this detailed story from the accuser, but there are also these things that don't quite fit. It's really hard to know what to believe.
Exactly, and this is where the courts are important. They need to look at all the evidence, what the accuser says, anything that supports her, and what the defense does to challenge her claims.
So it's not our job to decide if she's telling the truth.
Okay.
Our job is to really try to understand this complicated situation and to look at it from every angle.
Exactly, and I think it's also important to remember that this case is bigger than just Jay-Z and Diddy. It's about how we as a society deal with accusations of sexual assault.
You're right. This case could really impact the Me Too movement and how we view power in the music industry.
Absolutely. This case is like a tiny part of a much larger conversation we need to have as a society, and it's a conversation that needs to keep going.
Okay, so we've broken down the details of the lawsuit, the inconsistencies, and the bigger societal implications. What's next for us? Where do we go from here with this deep dive?
I think it's time to look at how Jay-Z and Diddy have responded to all of this. We've talked about their initial statements, but I think we should really dig into their legal strategies and how their past actions might be influencing how they're dealing with this.
Let's do it. Let's break down their responses and see what they tell us about these two men. So we have this really complicated legal battle going on with some serious accusations and different stories coming out. But it seems like there's more to it than just the legal stuff, right? Jay-Z and Diddy are big names. Their reputations are on the line. It's like a PR battle, too.
Yeah, definitely. This case shows how what people think can really affect the legal system. Both Jay-Z and Diddy have these public images they've built up over the years, and these allegations could totally ruin those images.
It makes you think, how much does public opinion really matter in situations like this? Can someone really be innocent until proven guilty when everyone's heard these serious accusations?
That's the tough part, right? In our legal system, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But in the public eye, it doesn't always work that way.
Especially with social media where information or misinformation spreads so fast.
Yeah, exactly. And in this case, we're dealing with two people who are already controversial to some. They have their fans and people who don't like them. It's hard to know how this will affect their image in the long run.
It's interesting how their past actions are being brought up too. Like Diddy's arrest on those other charges, racketeering, sex trafficking, all of that. That's going to make people look at these new accusations differently, whether he's actually guilty or not.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore. Those past charges create a whole story that's hard to forget. And Jay-Z has had his own controversies, too, over the years. Infidelity, business disputes, things like that.
So it's not just about these specific allegations. It's about what they've done before, the stories that are already out there about them.
Right. And all of this is happening while the hashtag #MeToo movement is still going strong, which has brought a lot of attention to sexual assault and power dynamics in the music industry and other places, too.
It feels like we're at a point where we're really rethinking how we deal with these kinds of accusations and how we hold powerful people responsible for their actions.
It's a complicated conversation that's still changing, and this case is a big part of it. Now, thinking about Jay-Z's legal strategy, I think it's interesting that he's been way more aggressive than Diddy.
Yeah, he's not just saying he didn't do it.
Yeah.
He's going after the accuser, questioning her story, even saying there should be a criminal investigation. Why do you think he's doing that?
Well, it's risky, but it could pay off big time. By pushing for a criminal investigation, he's putting himself at risk legally, but he's also hoping that the higher standard of proof in a criminal case will work to his advantage.
It's like he's saying, I'm so sure I'm innocent that I'm okay with facing the worst possible legal consequences.
Exactly. It's bold, and it could backfire if more evidence comes out that supports the accuser's claims. But it also shows the public that he's not afraid to fight and that he believes he'll be proven innocent.
Diddy's team, on the other hand, they're being much more defensive. They're saying it's all a publicity stunt and that the accuser is trying to extort money. Why do you think they're taking that approach?
Probably a few reasons. Diddy's already facing those other serious criminal charges, so his lawyers probably want to avoid any more legal trouble. Plus, they might think the accuser's case isn't that strong and that they can discredit her in court.
It's like their different pasts, even their personalities, are showing up in their legal strategies.
That's a good observation. Jay-Z has always seemed like someone who's in control. In his music, his business, everything. It makes sense that he's taking charge in this case, too. Diddy, he's always used his charm to get by. His lawyers seem to be more focused on protecting his image and minimizing the damage.
It makes you wonder how much of what we see from them is really who they are and how much is just an act.
It's hard to say for sure, but what we do know is that this case is making both Jay-Z and Diddy deal with their past and how it's affecting them now.
And it's making all of us think about some tough things. Power, privilege, and how complicated it is to deal with accusations of sexual assault.
Absolutely. This case isn't just about these two guys. It's about a system that often doesn't protect victims or hold people who do bad things accountable.
So as we finish up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts? What should our listeners be thinking about after hearing all of this?
This case really shows that even the most powerful people aren't above the law. But it also shows how hard it can be to get justice in a system that can be unfair.
And it leaves us with more questions than answers. How will this case affect the #MeToo movement? Will it change how we think about power in the music industry? And will justice be done?
Those are questions we'll have to keep thinking about as this story unfolds. And I think it's important for all of us to talk about these things, to learn about sexual assault allegations, and to fight for a system that's more fair and just.
I totally agree. We need to keep talking about this. This deep dive has been really insightful, and I'm sure our listeners will be paying attention as this case goes forward. Until next time.